Brian and I have not had a chance to share ideas on how to conduct this session, but let me start. I am, of course, an international business professor at CORE, and with some training in international law. And while international law is disappointing, as we're seeing in the Ukraine, there are remedies that cross borders that can be resorted to. For example, regarding cybercrime, I mentioned it in the chat. There is a convention, the Budapest Convention, for the prevention and the prosecution of cyber crimes. I'm not even sure the United States has ratified it, but maybe Rick knows. But there are models. For example, if you take companies highly dependent on trademarks and brands, they have banded together and really invested heavy money, not only in lawyers, but people who actually go out in the field with big arms, as it were, to really go after fraudsters and imitators and the like. So that's one model. So I'm just wondering if the insurance approach in, we'll buy the insurance, we'll cover our risk, is really the way to prevent that. Because if it comes right down to it, other than the mom and pop hackers, the major hackers, either state-sponsored or not state-sponsored, can probably be physically identified. I am sure intelligence services and police authorities and Interpol have a pretty good idea what some of them, the recurrent one, the repeat offenders, as it were. So I am really surprised the corporate world has not banded together, at least some of the more impacted firms, to really hire a few operators to go after such folks, particularly in areas of the world that will not extradite and that will close their eyes. So Brian, I don't mean to monopolize, but that's my first question, and I'd like some replies, or I don't know, or it seems like an illegal way to proceed, send a group of people with guns and really shoot them down. That's really not what I mean, but I suppose that could be part of it. It's open.
So Dr. McIntyre, I'll jump in to respond to two things. First, the Budapest Convention, I think, has been signed by the United States.
Okay.
But going on the offense, that's basically what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a fundamental problem, though, with asking corporate America or any corporation to do that. First off is they don't even know whether they're legally permitted to do that. So that's probably the big exposure. But even if they wanted to, or if they were inclined to, that's not what the business that they're in. Right. So why am I going to tell my team, go spend money trying to take down some company or group in, China or Russia or wherever it might be, because I'm trying to, generate revenue, not spend money on solving some other problem. So I would think that most organizational leadership would tend to have that kind of a mindset, unless they've been directly stung and they've got a very vindictive leader. But it requires both of those things. You have to have felt real pain, and you've got to have somebody who's willing to say, I'm going to spend money on this, even though it doesn't generate any profit for my business.
We kind of started with the premise that some firms, their survival is at play, is at play in matters of cyber crimes.
Well, it is true that that their survival is at play. I think that's true. Probably many more companies than people even recognize, and yet at the same time, their business model doesn't involve spending a material percentage of their money on offensive cyber strategies. They can't even spend enough money on defensive cyber strategies right now.
So it's their own fault.
Perhaps one person's opinion. Maybe others would have a different.
No, I'm just being rhetorical, devil's advocate.
Yeah, fair enough.
Dr. Olu, you were laughing. Was my remark totally naive?
The remark is very, very good, because if you are proactive, that doesn't mean that you are going after other companies. Is creating awareness within an organization and also planning is always part of the return on investment. At least a section of the organization or a company should make it as a point of duty every day. You have people to set up your network. You have people to be in charge of the cyber. They monitoring activity. And if they see a malicious code or someone trying to infiltrate, it's not going to be done in a day. They just see an occurrence. That means they must be prompted and be well organized, not when they shut down the entire operation, but a proactive. So at the CEO level or the president level, at least if they know that the survival of that company is based on the product of what they are producing, it's always good to have a section or some money set aside. And again, like I've emphasized, it can be through collaboration. It doesn't have to be that you create an entire sub type of atmosphere, but at least a baby step in a way that you prepare for any adversity. That's what I think
Okay.
one should consider.
What if a state actor aims for a government entity such as the IRS or maybe a disarmament agency? Paul, I noticed you had some consulting experience with the IRS, if I'm not wrong. Would a government be justified in taking the means that Rick indicated are not possible for a private company? That is to say, retortion and offensive. And I'm sure it's already done. I mean, I don't know, but I can't imagine a government sitting on its hands and, you know.
Well, I think it's an interesting topic, and I think the reality is that governments around the world are constantly using the digital means to collect information and spy on each other all the time. And when this becomes public, when the public finds out about it, there's always a lot of rhetoric and conversation about how unacceptable it is. But in reality, I think it's statecraft. It's how governments act and are expected to act. Where I think it gets dicey is when something goes from an espionage type of operation where they're collecting information, no matter how politically unpopular that is, I don't think that there's going to be any real retaliation besides, conversations and people wagging their fingers. If it becomes something that to use a military terminology, that creates effects, to degrade systems or take systems down, then I think that's when people have to really think of whether it's an act of war or something that warrants some form of retaliation. But the other interesting thing about this is you can't always judge intent with these things. Systems break, and that's also true for malware. If you have a piece of malware that you implant onto and I'll make something up, if you break into the IRS, or let's say the OSG, that everybody's records got stolen that has ever had a clearance in the U.S., right? All your documents. Let's say during the course of that exfiltration, there was a malfunction in the malware that caused those systems to go down. Does the government interpret that as an attack that was meant to degrade those systems and prevent, security clearances for being issued, or how do you respond to that? So I think a lot of times that is part of the issue with these types of activities. Is one, it's hard to attribute who these attacks are being conducted by, because if I'm, if I'm China and I want to go and compromise some systems in Iran and then launch an attack from Iran, it's pretty easy to redirect where those attacks are coming from, and attribution is extremely hard to do well. And then trying to define what was the intent of the state actor, and do we want to escalate? Is it plausible that this was a mistake because malware is operated by humans in most cases, or was this an intentional act of war to degrade our system? So I think those are these are big policy issues, and those are the thought processes that go into play. But I also think this is why United States Cyber Command exists, and these are the thought processes and things that they're going to be working through and figuring out. And I suspect they're already doing in much bigger ways than we realize.
Can you tell us more about Cyber Command, either Robert or Brian, or maybe Rick?
I wouldn't be able to speak with any authority on it, but what was publicly available was the consideration around separating Cyber Command from the NSA. So that gives the state, if you will, the Cyber Command arm of it, and maybe who knows, NSA takes more of that inward-looking approach, or vice versa. But there's potential there. We're going to have some changes in the way things are thought of, because when the policies that govern us today were created, we weren't in this world, the world that we're in today.
Brian, I have some more, but I don't want to exclude you here. So the floor is yours.
The only thing I wanted to maybe tack on to this was, when we've had, like, I've been participating in these seminars and summits with UIBS and Georgia Tech Cyber for close to a couple years now. And when I was first serving as a panel moderator, one of the questions I would ask panelists was, what do you think of the legislation called the Active Cyber Defense Certainty Act, the so-called Hack Back Bill? And John, with your bringing up this point, it got me thinking about that. And I haven't really seen much about it lately. The general consensus seems to be that it's kind of a bad idea. And I just took a look at congress.gov to see has this bill been killed? And it just it was introduced in 2019, and I don't see any updates on it. But would the panel care to talk about is this legislation a bad idea? Does it open up entire new cans of worms that we just don't want to get into, and this bill should be killed? What do y'all think?
Well, I'll pick up on my prior comments there, Dr. Canada. So for anybody to take an offensive strategy, fighting back, if you will, means that they are inherently inviting themselves for the reverse to happen back to them. So if you're going to go on the offense, you better be really confident in your defense. And there is literally zero companies in the world that are very confident in their defense. So why would you open yourself to a retribution attack when you go, you attack, you get the counterattack? Why would you do that? Even if the bill were passed and it was given clearance, and you were given clearance as an organization, I'd still ask the question of why would you do that? You're only going to regret it at the end of the day. That's my position. That if I were consulting with a client, I would say, interesting idea, hazardous to execute on. I would really advise you against.
I would piggyback on that and say the two things. One, the amount of money that you would spend to create that capability, I think, would be much better invested in defensive capabilities, and you'll get a much better return on your investment. But the other thing, going back to the attribution piece, by the time if you're going to do attribution correctly, by the time you are confident about where this attack originated for you to launch some sort of counterattack, they could be long gone, right? So I think it's fun to think about, and it makes people feel good to try to defend themselves actively, but it just is, in my mind, is not a practical matter unless you have the resources to stand up your own NSA and Cyber Command to have the intelligence and capabilities sitting, waiting, and ready for those things? And then if so, then what else could you do with that money that would have a much better impact for you and your customers or your constituents if you're a government agency or whatever?
I think Alex might have something to say.
I was trying to find the hand to raise. I rarely use Zoom.
It's on the bottom.
A couple of points. The first is small businesses or medium-sized businesses. Well, they really need to form consortia and pool resources together. I have been involved in one such effort, but as was pointed out correctly, they do not see investment in cybersecurity as directly relevant to their business. And that they have to be educated that this is part of the cost of doing business. Now, insurance companies, they are still discovering, how to insure against cyber damage. And they also need to work on this and develop models. And also, going back 150 years in history, Hartford Steam Boiler Insurance Company was created to make sure the boilers do not explode, and they were exploding all over the place. And so they invented Hartford steam valve. That was a wonderful invention. Everybody is using that to this day, and it solves much of the problem. In other words, the insurance company itself needs to invest in technology that would make them understand their own business better, and they will provide better insurance coverage. Next point about research and partnerships. Well, our enemy here in the academic world is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, because they devour all researchers. And so there is nobody left to work at the universities. I mean, out of 3 positions in computer science at any university, 2 remain unfilled every year. 1 out of 3 remains unfilled. And that is a tremendous challenge. Partnerships here are again very important. We talked about Ben Gurion. We're developing a partnership with Ben Gurion University. We actually signed a preliminary agreement last May. And by the way, we also have an agreement with Clark Atlanta University in general cyber area. Last point I wanted to make about is the nation investing in cyber defense. Well, US Cyber Command was mentioned several times. Well, it is my neighbor here in Augusta. And so about 4 years ago, a decision was made to consolidate all Army cyber activities here in Augusta with the name of United States Army Cyber Command. Since then, it was upgraded to US Cyber Command. In other words, it's now not just Army, it's all of US defense. And in fact, as already was pointed out, General Paul Nakasone is both the commanding officer of US Cyber Command and NSA. In fact, I have his signature. I don't know if you can see it right here at the bottom of the. I don't know why it's not working. At the bottom of the certificate. So this is our designation as the National Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense, signed by Nakasone. We are actually collaborating with some organizations at Fort Gordon, where they are. And of course, I have no idea what they're doing there, and I do not want to speculate, but I will just tell you that in the last 2 years, I would say about 3,000 to 4,000 families moved to Augusta area, specifically to work with the US or for the US Cyber Command. The result is that the real estate properties are skyrocketing, but circumstantial evidence that we are doing something very serious about cyber defense. Thank you.
Brian, I wanted to take a slightly different tack. The Biden administration, in collaboration with its European partners, created last year the Trade and Technological Council, the TTC, first convened in Pittsburgh and then second in Saclay, France, just about a month ago. Now, TTC is supposed to be the West response to efforts by China and others, notably Russia, to really threaten the IT dimension, the IT progress, the IT leadership of the West. So the big question is whether democratic governments can develop a meaningful alternative in terms of cyber to potential adversaries or outright enemies. So do you think that we are in need of a new regime to govern the cyber world? And if so, why so little progress? I realize it's a sort of a geostrategic question, but that's what the TTC is trying to do. And they've got meetings and they are divided up in working groups and so on intelligence, artificial, on cybersecurity, on new standards and so on. Rick, any thoughts? If you have followed, few people have really followed what goes on in TTC. I spent a week in Washington and talking to people. It came up time and again, just.
Well, so I'll admit, I don't know the particulars of what the discussions and thoughts are, but I guess I'll harken back to a comment I made earlier in today's session. Your question implies that there is this group of people that are in the good guy countries, the United States, whatever, and then there's this other set of people that are in the bad people countries, China, Russia, and that it's us versus them, and there's this clean line between the two of us. And I would suggest that that's a fundamentally flawed view of the world. The people in China are writing software that's going into products that are being distributed by US manufacturers. Same for India, same for Russia, same for everyone. Our technological world is way too intertwined to think of it in a us versus them mindset. So I think we have to instead be thinking about how do we elevate our game on the defensive side of things? How do we protect ourselves against vulnerabilities that can even, crop up by the good guys? They just do bad coding, right? Things like that happen all the time. And so, really the issue is much more about things that we can control and how do we better protect our environment through good software development practices, good monitoring, making sure things are patched correctly, training of people, all of the things that we've talked about throughout this call. But I'm not personally convinced that we will find the line in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean where our good guys can go to that line and the bad guys are all on the other side. I think that there is no such line. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
No, I understand the argument. I mean, it's a flat world argument. I mean, but
Yes.
we have seen the re-emergence of economic nationalism, another form of nationalism with a revenge. And the digital world in terms of transnational issues is a lot more than cybersecurity. It's also privacy. It's also data movement.
Yeah.
It's the agreement between President Biden and Commissioner von der Leyen about a privacy shield between the European Union and the United States as well. Excuse me. Dr. Olu.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I like what Rick have made as a point. It's a valid point, but when I look back at 2001, when we were in Geneva for the Global Knowledge Partnership, people are beginning to look at the vulnerability in terms of cybersecurity. during that period, we were planning that we keep our own defense and everything will be all right. And I brought up to the group, which I wrote a position paper on during that contribution to the group, that again, you have a pipeline. If the end part of the pipeline is leaking, we look at Europe, we look at other places, we neglect certain geographic area in the world, just like in Africa. I said there may be problem along the line in terms of the financial, the FinCo area. And 10 years after or some years after, it becomes reality where a person can take a $1 from a bank account of several people that result into maybe 5 million or bigger than that. Now, each of the bankers have to now think closely. In the same token, we begin to think of cyber. We forget that there are some other factor area like IoT, like AI. Individuals don't need to be the one hiring everybody to be a police within their company. We can leverage on technology in terms of the AI type of enhanced type of cyber defense. A company may just focus on defending themselves, but if there is discrepancy and things like that, the AI part can kick in and try to mitigate the loss. So we just need to begin to shift our focus. It's just, I don't want to date myself to long time. When computer people will look at it, when I was teaching at A&T or maybe Virginia Tech or Georgia Tech, we look at the computer and you cover it. And they even make the students not to touch it. But today, it's even more than that. We should begin to think ahead. From the law point of view, ethics is a real fundamental aspect, which even for legislation and things, we need to pay attention to. On the military side, the ethics aspect of it kicks in. So again, I will rest my case, but there are some other dimension to it: data science, AI, machine learning, IoT, that can play a role that makes a person to look at the cyber as a more than just the test, exchange, and things like that. Thank you.
Brian?
If y'all don't mind, I wanted to ask a question that we didn't have time to get to in the Q&A for session 2, specifically about mobile security threats. And I think it's fairly recent news, but I imagine most of you are aware that Apple recently committed to a new technology for "quote unquote" passkey technology to enable passwordless logins and account setups for apps and websites. And this is being built to be seamless across both its desktop and mobile ecosystems. And on the surface, I think it looks like a good thing for users. It may potentially put some folks out of business like LastPass and 1Password, but from the user standpoint, maybe also from like the IT manager standpoint, there's a convenience there. There's the need to not worry about passwords. Apple's obviously hyping this up as being a good thing, but I tend to view any new thing that comes down the line as being a bit of a double-edged sword. You can't get something for nothing. So do any of you have any thoughts about any potential downsides of this passwordless technology for users, for IT departments, web developers? What do y'all think?
Generally, of this technology as it's being introduced, the FIDO 2 standard, I believe, is what they're using for this. FIDO being fast identity online. I think that trusting humans to remember enough secrets to secure all of online accounts is not a sustainable, it's not a sustainable path, and it creates massive opportunities either for password reuse types of things, where if you compromise one account, you compromise everything, or social engineering attacks where somebody can be tricked into putting their password into a fake site. And I think the key, the fact that people don't have to remember technologies is, don't have to remember passwords is obviously a big benefit to the end user. But I think the killer feature and what they're building out, not just Apple, the FIDO2 Alliance as a whole, is having that two-way authentication. So it's not sending your or assigning your authentication information with something from the service that you're authenticating to. So if someone's pretending to be Google, for example, and you try to sign into it, that breaks the authentication. And I think this technology is not really new. I'm a big YubiKey user. We use these for our company. I use them personally. I try to give them to anybody that I can for that authentication piece. So I think it's not new technology from the authentication standpoint, but it's what they're doing is making it easier for the average consumer to use this technology, because now they can just use it with their Face ID or their fingerprint or whatever it may be. Now, of course, there is some risk there, right? It's another sort of central point of failure. And I think I agree with you that there are always trade-offs, and now somebody's phone becomes their identity, and what are the risks that come along with that? If their iCloud account is compromised, or they lose their phone and someone's able to get past that initial thing. But I think it is a step in the right direction. With of course the caveat that it does introduce a new attack surface and new risks that will have to be accounted for.
Olu, you had your hand up?
Not really, but I take the advantage because what Paul have said is very correct. It's in the right direction. When you look at the PKI, the Public Key Initiative, at the early stage with DISA and some of the agency, where you have to authenticate, checking against the public key and things, it's just an expansion of it that we are seeing. And also we use Kerberos, for the authentication with the Army High Performance Computing in those days. So the reliance on human to generate those code kind of diminish, and now with the AI and some of the technology, that kind of enhanced. What I may just throw in addition to that, when you look at blockchain, for example, in some parts of Africa, they make some fabric, very beautiful one. They call it adire. And now, when you look down the line, for the locals that are making those fabrics and dyeing it and things, that's their livelihood. But now people come, take a picture of it, and go to certain countries that are very culprit for this and replicate. And it's not the authentic one. Those type of tracking and things like that becomes of interest to business group and livelihood of others. I just threw that one out there. So authentication and things in any direction is a good thing to have. Let me just throw one joke of something that came in through the WhatsApp yesterday. A lady was at the machine buying things, and immediately when the thing comes out, he wants to authenticate. He just bend like this, and the person lying up behind him, they just capture the image of their face, and the thing say, pay. The lady just walk away, and that's another that part of the authentication when it comes to human factor. So I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yes, it does, actually. I'll have to try that. I just wanted to say one last thing. Rick, I tend to agree with you. I mean, I teach international business, for Christ's sake. I am into globalization. But I think we're seeing the emergence of data nationalism. I mean, currently the technical standards and norms that we have been talking about in matters of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence have largely been developed by the private sectors, large companies, primarily based in the United States, but not exclusively.
Right.
I can tell you, being a student of Chinese economics, that the Chinese are tired of this domination in terms of tech standards. They want to free up. They want to develop their own standards, which makes it easier for them to control really the flow of information, the flow of data within their own society, which is a matter of survival. So while I would like to agree with you in the manner in which you phrased it, you know, it's not us versus them. It may not be, but it's several of us having different ideas on the nature of technology and how to structure innovation and how to set priorities for innovation in matters related to cybersecurity. That's all I wanted to say. And even the Europeans have a very different approach than the US. Look at the Digital Markets Act, EU Digital Markets Act, EU Digital Services Act. This business about the general data, protection data that was basically struck down by the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and then renegotiated between President Biden and Commission President von der Leyen. It really indicates that it's not as unified a data world as we'd like to think as we move into the 21st century. That's all I wanted to say.
Fair enough. And you know, my comments are not in any way to suggest that we couldn't do a lot more than we do today. I just recognize that, you know, the US as a country is the source of a non-insignificant portion of the attacks. So how do you protect us from ourselves, right? It's not always somebody coming across the water into the US. It's oftentimes the US attacking the US itself.
It's a great point.
And
Right.
speaking of, you know, are we making more problems for ourselves? You know, what part of the reason why I was interested in everybody's perspective about you know, this new passkey technology, and I know it's not new, but you know, it's new to it's going to become newer in the mainstream thanks to companies like Apple. But my concern about that is, you know, just, you know, are people going to become more complacent and expecting that, oh, you know, my computer will handle this for me, and you know, they're not going to have enough of a proper mindset to just, you know, be personally defensive about this sort of thing. Like if we could extend this to, say, cars, for example. I bought a new car last year, a new Toyota. It's got Toyota Safety Sense 2.0, and it's not quite a Tesla, but it's making sure that I don't, you know, run off the road. It's keeping an eye on who's around me and that sort of thing. And I think it's, you know, I think it's great, and I'm really glad I have it. But I think it maybe erodes at, you know, my need to be, you know, a defensive driver, you know. And so I'm hoping, like, I look forward to the technology coming out. I think it'll be super convenient. I just hope that, you know, it doesn't, like I say, erode our need to be defensive and to get out ahead of these things, and just to have the right mindset to avoid being complacent.
Can you say, in concluding, can you say that the more data privacy we afford all users at whatever point, the more cybersecurity we all get? And so, you know, and I think corporations want to have access to as much data as they can. You know, they want to track you down to the last move. But if we remedy that, we probably cure a good bit of cybersecurity issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, Annie, I see your face. That means we have reached the magic hours. So unless there are other parting thoughts, Annie?
Yes, sir.
You want to take us out?
Yes, indeed. I want to thank you and Dr. Canada for organizing this very interesting dialogue. I know this issue is so big, you know, 45 minutes is hardly, you know, we can scratch the surface of the problem we are talking, but it gives us time and opportunity to put our thoughts together. And I would like to share with you one more time, last time for this session today, you know, the partners who have helped us to put together this event. Georgia Tech Cyber, Global USA Business Forum, UIBS, State of Georgia, Georgia Department of Economic Development, Forward Foresight, University of South Carolina, Beaufort, Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, Next Generation Manufacturing, Connex, USIBRC, and Third Millennium Technologies. Please pay attention to our upcoming events. There are two set of dates we would like request you to pencil down. One is July 27th, next month. We are changing the flavor of the conversation and going to another big problem our Earth is facing now is a sustainability and circular economy conference. And in November, we will be having our 13th annual US-India Business Summit, 28th Georgia Tech Global Business Forum, and 2nd Global USA Business Forum. There might be one or two other events which we will be doing, and we'll like to stay in touch with all of you. I want to thank all the speakers for today's session. And we encourage you to stay in touch with us, communicate with us, give us some ideas, become our partners and sponsors for bringing future edition of such programs. With your permission, Dr. McIntyre and Dr. Canada, I would like to close this session and this conference.
Thank you all.
And lastly, we are recording this session and would send you the recorded edited version in about 7 to 10 business days of anybody who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Signing out.
Cheers.
Thank you.